about the time. I can go fast or slow, but it's important to pray and know what's going on in other places. So we had talked last week about doing some different studies, seeing what you would like to do, and go back to parables. I never was satisfied with what I did with a parable on the soil. That was the very first thing I did here, 2 months ago, or however long it was, the two months ago, and I would like to go back to take a look at that again. And as I get into it, I think it was your wife that gave a definition of a parable. Let me see. Merle's wife, Mary what?
Esther.
Mary Esther, yeah. But I was wondering if anybody had thought about any more about what a parable is.
Comparative story.
Yeah, comparative story. I listened to a sermon, not a sermon, but a essay by Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson. I don't know if anybody ever heard of him. Do what now?
I know the name.
Well, he had a parable called, an essay on compensation. And in that, he helped me understand something that was a big puzzle to me for the longest time. And that was Proverbs chapter 8, where he explains the writer about what a parable is. Ralph Waldo Emerson said that parables are the same everywhere in the world. Every country has the same parables. And if you want to learn something about a country, you learn their parables. And that got me thinking, why are parables the same in every country? Every society, every culture has the same parables. That may not have ever crossed your mind, but it was on my mind why everything is the same. Anybody would venture to guess or take a shot at that?
Well, if it's a scriptural parable, it's going to reach everybody,
Yes,
regardless of where you come from.
that's true.
Something I can think about.
Well, it's the law of gravity the same everywhere in the world. What goes up comes down. So when God created the world, like Larry Merle said, we're all one tribe. We're all been created by one group of people. And so we're all come from the same. So the Bible can be translated and everybody can read it and say, yeah, I can identify with that. Because everything has been created by God and everything is the same everywhere in the world. Now, I don't know how that affects you, but that affects me in the sense that I can go somewhere and I can know these people have to live by the same rules I live by. Now, they may not live by the same rules. That's the reason Paul says that everybody is going to be without excuse when they stand before God, because they all have to live by the same rules. And somebody said one time, years ago, they say, what about people that have never heard about God? How's God going to judge them? Anybody have an answer to that one?
Doesn't the first chapter of Romans speak to that?
Right.
They know something's missing because they're worshiping idols. They know something's different. They know something's not what it should be. They know there's something greater than they are.
Yeah, they know. I mean, it just didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
The first reason back in Greeks 300 years before Christ had the same. If you see something, I saw a cartoon the other day, and these two snowmen were talking to each other, and one said, "You know how I got here? How?" He said, "A little old snowflake started growing and grew me up, and I became a snowman from a snowflake." And the other one says, you're crazy. Said, somebody made us. We just didn't come from a snowflake. I know it's a cartoon, but it was an interesting cartoon. And these two snowmen were talking about how they got here. But God created the world in such a way that everybody has to respond to the same laws, to the same situation. And somebody says, well, what about somebody who has not heard about the laws of God? What are they going to be judged by? Well, you know, in the 7th chapter of Corinthians, it says you are not, you're guilty if you judge somebody else. You're going to be judged by the same laws, the same measure that you measure somebody else. You're going to be measured by that. So how many people in the world will say that it's wrong to lie? Everybody, every culture says it's wrong to lie. Every culture says it's wrong to steal. Do you steal? Every culture knows that it's wrong to hurt little children. Every culture knows these. So you're going to be, even though you have never read the 10 Commandments, you know that certain things are wrong. And if you do any of those things that you know you're wrong, you're going to be judged by those. It's a universal. Any thoughts on that? So that helped me understand that when I was in Greece, I asked them what some of their parables were. Same as here. Now you know the story of what you sow, you reap. Every country has a parable like that. Now some of them say, you know, what goes around comes around. I mentioned this the very first time I was here, but I'm going to re-say it again because I like to hear myself say it. But the karma, everything. So how does that help us when we're sharing the gospel with somebody? We can tie into that, and they know that. Now, another super major aspect of sharing the gospel is a word that I know we don't use it every day. It's a very technical word, propitiation. You may be familiar with the word propitiation. But propitiation is a secular word.
Everyone else has left the call.
Well, I guess Jonathan left the call.
Huh?
I guess Jonathan left the call.
He didn't like parables. I shouldn't have said this is the second time. But propitiation, the secular world, and it came into the religious world to satisfy the anger of an angry God. That's what that means. To satisfy the anger of a wrathful God. That's what and Jesus is our propitiation. So everybody is afraid to stand before God, no matter where they are in the world, no matter who you're talking to. They're afraid to stand before God. Because the book of Ecclesiastes says, God has placed in the heart of man eternity. That means every person on the face of the earth knows that there is something going on after this life. And so we don't have to, somebody says, I don't believe that. We know that God has put that in that person. That God has put that in that person. So those are some of the things about a parable that is interesting to me, that everybody knows the parables that we're looking at. Everybody understands them. So that's one aspect of how we can share the gospel with these parables, knowing that they will be able to be identified with the person. They know that. So anyway, I I just think that's so interesting that sometimes we start witnessing to somebody or sharing the gospel. Well, they're just not interested in this. That's not going to ring a bell with them. It's not going to resonate with them. We can rest assured that it will, because God in Proverbs 8, he said, "I, wisdom, in the beginning of the time, created everything." And he also, in Proverbs chapter 1, said that wisdom is everywhere. It's everywhere. You can get wisdom everywhere. It's in the courthouse. You want wisdom, you go to the courthouse. You take a look at it. It's wisdom in the courthouse. It's at the marketplace. Wisdom is there. I am everywhere. The things I have created, it's everywhere. So when we talk to somebody, they may say, well, it's not going to not ring a bell with me, but it is, because God has put it in that way. It's going to be everywhere. Now, the next thing that when we go to parables, in Mark, at the end of this parable, they asked Jesus, "Why do you talk in parables?" This is another major thing that happened to me this last week as I was trying to figure something out. In Mark chapter 4, they asked Jesus, "Why do you talk in parables? Why do you talk in parables?" He says, "But to you it has been given to know the mysteries of the kingdom of God, but to those that are on the outside, all things come in parables." Now, I don't know if this ever bothered you, but it bothered me. "So that seeing they may not see, not perceive, and hearing they may not understand, lest they should turn and their sins be forgiven." Now, why would Jesus intentionally make things hard to understand? You ever thought about that? Why Jesus would say something like that? I've been doing a study on my own of hard things of Jesus, things that are difficult in the Bible to understand. And this is one of the ones that's kind of at the top of the list. "So that seeing they may not see, may not perceive, and hearing they may not understand, lest they should turn and their sins be forgiven." I don't know if you've ever thought about that.
Sounds like he doesn't want their sins to be forgiven.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Why would that even be there? Why would that be there? Well, I don't say I have all the answers on that one, but it is a puzzle to me. But 1 Corinthians 2:8 helps me to understand a little bit. Paul is talking in 1 Corinthians 2:8, and he said that these things are a mystery from the foundation of the world. Because had it been, I'm kind of quoting it more or less, because had the rulers of this world knew what was going to happen when Jesus was crucified and rose again, they would have never crucified the Lord of glory. Now, he's not talking about us. He's talking about the rulers of this world. The Satan and his demons, had they have known what was going to happen, they said they would have never crucified the Lord of glory, because that was their destruction. They wouldn't have done it. They would have avoided, they would have let Jesus live on forever, right here on this earth. They'd have never let Jesus be crucified. Now, as I meditate and thought about that, a lot of times in the Old Testament, you remember Paul said that the people in the Old Testament, they looked into the sayings of the prophets. They wanted to understand it, but they couldn't. It was hidden from them. It was a mystery to them. Now, why would it be a mystery to them? Why would not God just let everybody know about it? I think you hear something back there.
No, she's reading. I
Oh,
just
okay.
said I don't have an answer.
You reckon because they didn't have the discernment of the Spirit in their life?
That's
The
true.
Holy Spirit?
They didn't. But he could have revealed it to them. He could have. They looked earnestly into it, but they couldn't understand it. He couldn't understand it. Now, another thing, I think I've told you before that I spend some time in John 14, 15, 16, 17. And there's a phrase in John 16 where Jesus is talking about the relationship between God the Father and the Son. And he said, towards the end, he said, verse 25, he said, I've been talking to you in figurative language. Not necessarily in parables, but I've been talking to you in figurative language. But I'm not going to talk to you anymore in figurative language. I'm going to talk to you plainly about the relationship between the Father and you. I'm going to talk to you plainly about it. And then, we don't know which one of the disciples said, okay, now you're explaining things very clearly. Now we understand that we didn't understand before. Now this was just hours before he was crucified and resurrected. Why did you wait so long to tell us plainly? In that first part of that chapter 16, Jesus said, there's coming a day that they're going to kick you out of the kingdom, out of the synagogue, and they're going to kill you as well. Now, I didn't tell you this at the beginning because I was with you, but now I'm telling you plainly, you're going to get killed for following me. Now, I didn't tell you that at the beginning when I asked you to follow me. I thought, wow, what a bait and switch, you know. But now I'm telling you very clearly what's going to happen. And that was in the very last hours. Now, again, why do you think Jesus waited to the last minute to tell them what was going to happen to them when they were following him?
They probably would have turned and gone another direction.
Yeah.
And might have tried to protect him more.
Yeah. Now, one thing Jesus did do in that last chapter, chapter 16, he said, now y'all are all gonna leave and scatter. Because you see, Jesus said, I've lost none of the ones that are following me. I've kept them all. Now, who followed Jesus all the way to the end? Remember old Peter? Yeah, Peter followed. Now, that is another little puzzle to me. Now, I hope I'm not confusing you by talking about some of the things I'm working on. But I am working on some of these things, trying to figure these out. And I said, why did Peter keep on going? Has he lost his mind? Was he going to prove? Jesus said, you're going to deny me. Basically, Jesus told Peter, I want you out of here. If you stay close to me, you might die. I want you gone. All of you guys, he said in John 16, he said, y'all are all going to scatter. Like when they kill the shepherd, the sheep scatter. He said, I want y'all gone. I want out of here. He said, because it's going to get dangerous. And anybody that's around me is going to be in danger of their life. And so he had to step in and kind of save Peter. Because he said, y'all are all going to scatter. Now, they thought it was cowardness to scatter. But Jesus knew the danger that was coming. So he said, I want y'all out of here. I want you gone. But Peter, you're so dense, you didn't leave. And so now I'm going to have to figure out a way to save you now at this last minute. Because you didn't leave. You didn't get out of here. He said, y'all are all going to... when he said, y'all are all going to scatter, I don't think that was a statement. That's hard verses to understand, I know. I really don't think it was that he was telling Peter, you know, I know that you're going to fail, Peter, and you're going to leave. I think he was saying, I want y'all gone. It wasn't that y'all are going to scatter. I know you're going to do that. But it was more like, scatter, leave, get away. Because my job is to protect you up until the end. And if you stay close to me, and it's kind of a backward way. He knew Peter was going to deny him, but in somehow or another, God does some strange backward things to protect. He said, Peter, I know that's your character, and that's going to save you. Denying me is going to save you, Peter. Because if you brag about being a follower of me, you're going to go the same direction I am. And I'm not ready for you to die, Peter. I know your character. I know your character. You think you've got it all together, Peter, but you don't. And your cowardness is actually going to save you, Peter. Because if you had stood up and said, I'm ready to die with you, okay, put this one on a fourth cross. Take this guy too. He's gone too. But God has some, you've heard the statement, mysterious ways to save people. And I think that's what it is. But now, why did that happen? Well, in John chapter 6, this is where I've come to my conclusion. In John chapter 6, you remember when the people all went away there in John 6? They said, they all left. A lot of people left. They said, why did you leave? Because, Jesus said, because, or Peter said, where are we going to go? And Peter said, you're the only one that's got the words of life. We're going to stick with you because you're the only one that got the words of life. And Jesus said, all the rest of you people, y'all followed me because you got something to eat. As long as I kept feeding you, you were going to keep following me. As long as I kept healing you, you were going to follow me. But now that I told you in shady form, you know, not clear as it could be, but he told him, he said, you're going to leave because you're not getting the things that you want. Now, there's been a big studies of behavior. Maybe some of you studied psychology, sociology, and you know these big studies. Why do people do what is right? Why do people? Some people do what's right because they're afraid of going to jail. Some people do what's right because they know they're going to get a reward. They work hard, they're honest because they get a reward. Some people do what's right because of a good model. They want to be like their parents, their mother, their father, a great uncle or somebody. But the more they studied, the more they analyzed people. I don't remember, it's been so long ago, I don't remember the exact percentage, but it's a very small percentage of people that they do what's right simply because it's right. Not to get anything, not to be like anybody, but they do what's right because it's right. With no external stimulation, with no external reward. They just do what's right because it's right. Now that's about as close as I can come to realize why Jesus spoke in parables like this. Because he wanted people to follow him because it's right and not for something they can get out of it. Now, nobody can get that perfect because we receive Christ to avoid judgment, to avoid hell, to please God. So there are a lot of benefits in there. Now, Paul said that I've been caught up to the third heaven. And I know what's in the future. I know what I'm going to get. I know where I'm headed. I know what's laid out before me. So do you think it bothers me being shipwrecked, being stoned, being crippled, or whatever the thorn in the flesh, it bothers him? Do you think it bothers me sitting in a jail in Philippi, in the bottom jail in the sewer, singing praises? Because he said, I know what the future is. I know what's coming. I've seen it. Now the thing that bothers me is, why can't we see a little more of that? Why don't we see some of that? But Paul says the joy set before us cannot be compared with the suffering that we're going through in this temporary time here. And that's what Moses said. Moses said the same thing. He said he counted the the joy of being with the people of God greater reward than experiencing the treasures in Egypt, the treasures with Pharaoh. Now, I know you're thinking, boy, you have rambled us this day. You've gone around and around in a circle on this one. But it's to find out why Jesus spoke in parables. And do we follow Christ for really what he is? Somebody made a comment, said, would you be saved if you followed Christ, but at the end, there was nothing? That was the end of it. Did you follow Christ just because to follow Christ? And I heard that when I was back in high school, and I thought about that a lot. Do I have any ulterior motives for following Christ? Or is it just to follow him? Like Jesus said, you folks left me because you saw the food and left. But if I didn't give you food, would you still follow me? And so that's the parable. There's a lot of other things I had down here, but time's got away. I want you to think about some of the things that Jesus said was his word. What are some of the things? He said he's the door, the other parables, other things in there. Jesus said you're following not because you saw the signs, but not the signs, but me. The Bible says that the Bible is the two-edged sword, fire, hammer, a lamp, light, salt, food, seed, and a mirror. Maybe we'll look at those also. Well, any questions on this? Or was this totally off base and I'll not do anything like this again?
I like it because it makes you think. Makes you really deep think, do some deep thinking.
I think the parable of the sower, which is it's referenced in there, is an example of what I've heard this before, and it makes sense now. Seed parables. I've heard that phrase before. Now I kind of noticed that a lot of parables had seeds in them.
Yeah.
And so there's a whole category of parables that's called seed parables.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that until just recently. I remember that term, and then when I was studying, just following along with you, that dawned on me there. So that was a seed parable, the parable of the sower, wasn't it?
Right.
Okay, good. Now, I learned something today.
Well, that makes me feel good. Well, I call it, they're not necessarily, there are seed parables, but there are fruit parables.
Yeah.
A lot of fruit.
Well,
A lot of food parables.
I hadn't thought about that until I've got to seed parables, and I'll go from there.
Yeah.
But that makes a lot of sense, because you think about, there are a lot of parables that involve seeds. You know, where you throw your seeds, they'll grow here and they won't grow there. And it's planting a thought. That's what it's doing, so that you'll think about situations that are similar to that later, and maybe be guided by what you learn from the parable.
Another big section that one day to take a look at is the position parables of the body. Sit, walk, stand.
Progressive.
Yeah. And then there's the parable, if you want to call it a parable, more of an allegory, of Hagar and Sarah in Galatians. That's a big allegory. That's at least one allegory. And then there's the animal stories in the Bible. The ant, the spider, the coney, the mule,
Talking donkey,
talking donkey.
yeah. That's a cool story.
Okay, well, thank y'all for listening and helping me start boost some of the things that I'm thinking about. I'm at the edge of my thinking.
Ray, how much longer do you think you'll be with us?
Till Friday tells me to leave.
Okay. Tell him